we're now focused more on people than packets. And that, I think, will change the evolution of what the CIO will be over the next few years. This humanization of IT.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Download Podcast. We are thrilled, excited, humbled to be joined by Jason James, the CIO of NetHealth today. JJ, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks. I'm excited to be here. I even got out in the rain. First of all, it's rare that I show up anywhere these days. I haven't been anywhere in a year, and I came out in a torrential downpour.
It is pouring outside, like thunderstorms, tornadoes.
I had 3 texts on the way, and they were like, "Are you in the way of the tornado?" I'm like, what? What tornado? Hopefully not. So,
Hope not.
Hope not.
Well, thank you so much for being here. Sure. Again, truly means the world to us. So, joined also by Joel Andersen, our VP of Marketing here at Tier4. Joel, thanks for being here as well.
Always a pleasure.
Absolutely. Quick introduction for myself. I'm Jake Sherrill, founder and chairman of Tier4 Advisors. We've been in business for 8.5 years, founded in Atlanta, Georgia, on the premise of helping IT professionals simplify and expedite their projects. It's not just procurement. It's not just enterprise architecture. It's not just strategy and planning. But we have a database of hundreds of vendors that our clients have access to, whether that's a data center vendor, cloud, telephony, contact center, security, compliance. And we are the subject matter expert that literally and figuratively sits on your side of the table through these projects. So our goal is to help simplify your life and lower the stress for those types of projects. And if you need to find us, it's tier4advisors.com. And we'll be talking more about some of the other things you can find at tier4advisors.com a little bit later in the podcast regarding our events. Joel, say hi to everybody real quick.
Honored to be here. Honored to have JJ in the building.
Absolutely. And Jason, JJ. I've never called you Jason. What the hell?
Only family does that.
My
and even
gosh,
when they do it
JJ,
now,
I've never called you Jason, and I just did on the podcast.
At least you didn't call me JJ James. I have this
JJ
weird
James.
things. I'm like, there's not 3 J's. It's literally Jason James. I go by JJ. It's just faster.
goodness.
There's a brand now.
That's so funny.
There's a brand.
There's a brand. There is. There's only one JJ, if you know.
True story. A job ago, I showed up, and a guy that works for me, still works for me to this day, Jonathan Jackson, showed up, and he said, "Hi, I'm JJ." And I said, "Not anymore, you're not."
That's perfect.
That's awesome.
That's perfect. All right. JJ, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself to the crowd?
Sure.
That'd be great. Thanks.
Sure. Again, my name's Jason James. I am CIO of NetHealth. We're headquartered out of Pittsburgh. I live here in Atlanta. We, prior to the pandemic, we had offices throughout the United States. I myself have given up a corner office for a home office, much like most of America, but we're a SaaS-based provider focusing on the entire continuum of healthcare. That's everything from hospital to home. So if you happen to be in one of those care settings, our software is probably helping you.
Perfect. Wonderful. So we do a bunch of different segments here on the download, but the first one that we're going to do is rapid fire Q&A with JJ. JJ, tell us about your first job.
Well, every job I've ever had has been in IT.
Okay.
So at 15 years old, I have to set the stage. And this is not going to be fast, so we're going to set the stage anyway. So
That works.
I grew up a couple hours south of here in Alabama, a small town called Opelika, Alabama. Most famously as the backdrop of Norma Ray, right? I'm the first generation in my family on either side never to work in a cotton mill. So at 15 years old, my dad was HR director for the city, and he said, "Oh, I can get you a job mowing grass in the cemetery." And I said, "Oh, hell no, I'm not doing that." He said, "What about working in the grocery store?" I was like, "Nope, that don't sound like me either." He said, "Well, what do you want to do?" I said, "Give me 2 weeks and I'll come up with something." So at 15 years old, I started laying out Lantastic networks and doing PC upgrades. I think I was charging $25 an hour. I believe minimum wage was $4.25. I've been fortunate enough never to make minimum wage, and every job I've ever had has been in IT. So
That's great.
That started it all.
That's fantastic. What is your favorite? You've been a friend of Tier4 for quite a number of years.
Since
and
you
thank
started.
you again. 8.5 years, as a matter of fact. Thanks so much. What is your favorite Tier4 VIP event that you've ever attended?
Without question, the Porsche driving experience. And let's just say, it's not Porsche, it's Porsche.
Porsche.
There you go.
That's right. So we already talked about your first job. The next question is, how did you get into IT? So why don't I go ahead and put a little spin on that? So when you started your own kind of consulting practice, laying fiber, doing your thing there for $25 an hour, how did you parlay that into a career within IT?
Yeah, I just knew that's what I wanted to do. I didn't know what that meant, right? And so I started out, that second job, I worked as a night shift data processor at a bank. I remember this to this day because not only was I doing backups and I had to do the ATM transfers, I was logging in Jack Henry software and, maintain the database, IBM System 36, right? I walked in and I'm like, what the hell is this thing? It was an 8-inch floppy. I had never seen an 8-inch floppy. I had seen,
Is that the Oregon Trail floppy?
No,
from
that was 5 1/4. This was even bigger. I'm like,
Okay.
what is this thing? How do you format it, right? And so that was my second job, and every job after that was just in IT. I just started progressing into that, and so when I was 19 years old, I was a sophomore at Auburn. I ended up buying the value-added reseller I was working for. Decided we weren't going to focus on college students anymore. We were going to focus on small and medium businesses, and did about $400,000 in sales that first year at age 19. And it was awful. It was awful in the sense I was working 80 hours a week. I had to take a sabbatical from school. I would later finish my undergrad and graduate degree all online while I was working. But, I took that sabbatical, and luckily my parents were super supportive. Nobody ever questioned the fact that I was trying to do this. And a company out of Birmingham came and offered it, and I was like, you know what? I'm sick of small towns. I'm out of here. So I moved to Atlanta January 1st, 2000. So a little more than 21 years ago.
Y2K was your day to move to Atlanta.
Yeah, and so when the ball dropped and nothing died and planes didn't fall out of the sky and elevators still worked, I thought, I'm going to move to Atlanta.
Yeah.
And so I lived on a friend of a friend's couch, and that's how it was.
That's awesome. Yeah. That's great. So it might be hard to talk about your greatest professional accomplishment, but maybe your top 1, 2, or 3, if you want to just mention that. What would you say is your top professional accomplishment, or like I said, 1, 2, or 3?
I would say my top accomplishment is still loving what I do. I've been doing this since I was 15 years old, and you can tell by the gray in my beard that was a long time. And so finding a career that I'm still passionate about, still learning, still excited about, that I think is the greatest accomplishment. I mean, I can think about family members coming home each night exhausted and tired and barely making ends meet. And I've had an incredibly lucrative career that's taken me around the world. I've worked in Japan, I've worked in China, I've worked in Europe. And to still love that after this long. The second one is being exposed to what we're doing that changes the world. Like right now, we're in a position where our organization is doing well by doing good. We're reuniting caregivers where they're calling. When you look at what caregivers have gone through this past year with global pandemic, is exhausting. Not enough PPE, people dying constantly, and at the same time being able to support them. We may not have been the front line of fighting this disease, but we were empowering those that did, and that's an amazing accomplishment in my opinion.
Without a doubt. But what are some of the biggest challenges, or maybe the single biggest challenge that you've had to overcome in your career as well?
Yeah, it's all a challenge,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And in a good way, that's what drives it and makes it exciting. But when you realize it moves at a much more rapid rate. I think about early on in my career, and I think about how challenging it is to be a CIO now that they didn't face in the 90s. If you were a CIO in the 90s and you got one ERP system implemented, you were doing well. And if you look at what we did last year, there's 60 new systems brought online in a single year.
Right.
And then the entire industry facing external threats like ransomware, and then global pandemic. It is significantly harder to be a CIO today.
Yeah, it's wild to see that. To your point, a lot of CIOs are starting to see not only a drain on their team, but also a drain that they have maybe never experienced themselves in their own career. With the pandemic, with a lot of changes, with what the businesses are requiring of them. When the going gets tough, the tough get going, right? I mean, it's just kind of that situation.
Well, what we saw was all of a sudden the pandemic created a new form of CIO.
Right.
One focused on being a cultural change agent. For so long we were the tech empowerment of the business, and that's still table stakes. That's still what we do. But what we found was CIOs looking at tools that would allow people to connect in ways they hadn't connected before, more than just work. People weren't working from home. They were living at work. So how did you change that up where they could be engaged, where they could still connect and realize at the end of the day, it was this human at the other end? We're now focused more on people than packets. And that, I think, will change the evolution of what the CIO will be over the next few years. This humanization of IT.
People aren't working from home. They're living at work. Isn't that so true?
Yeah.
Especially those that have children at home, right?
I've got two small ones.
Right? I mean, it's
You know,
just...
my oldest is 2.5, right? And so, first of all, people stop apologizing when your pet comes into the frame or your child comes into the frame. We're in your home visiting,
exactly.
okay? And so there's plenty of times where my toddler will bang on the door and walk in the middle of the meeting. I was literally talking to a vendor, and she came in. This was before she could speak so much, and she sat on my lap, and we were trying to negotiate, and she goes, and he said, "Look, JJ, stop calling in the big guns. We'll drop it by 3% or 5%. And I said, "Well, I think you've got a new job, Jessica."
That's
so,
good. That's perfect. Yeah, I mean, so speaking of some of the challenges, to your point, right? It's a constant challenge, right? And it's really interesting to see how people candidly deal with those challenges.
Yeah, and the problem is, I mean, you have to look at it through a skewed lens. I mean, I haven't been in an office or a plane since February of the previous year, and what it required was people still had to work. If you think about the impact this would have been to the global economy 10 years ago, right? But because we were able to roll out like UCaaS platforms and bring phones online from wherever people lived, right? It enabled organizations to stay highly productive, to the point maybe too productive, and so organizations need to look at a potential burnout rate.
How do you as a leader, make sure that people aren't doing that kind of self-inflicted burnout and taking still some personal time, maybe even in the middle of the day?
You've got to make sure they understand that's okay to do, right? And it's okay to do because you have to do it yourself. If you're the kind of leader pinging somebody at 4 a.m. on Sunday morning going into Monday, then you're part of the problem.
Right, 100%.
Right? So you have to take your vacations as a leader. You got to make sure you're not denying their vacations as a leader. You've got to make sure you're engaging with them. And if you build a kind of organization, they'll understand that they can do that. I've never told people in my entire career, why don't you take off time to go to the doctor? I'm like, just go. HR is like, oh, no. But I'm like, just go. You'll make up the time. There's no such thing as a 40-hour work week. As long as the work gets done, it doesn't matter. The new norm will be very different than before. This idea is you can't expect people to be online constantly. And what it's done, it's created an immense opportunity because with hiring, if you think about such hot markets as Austin, Miami, Atlanta, just on the East Coast, now you're able to go into places like Tulsa and Buffalo and Des Moines. And so areas that are much more cost effective, but people don't change opportunities as often. So you can still find really good talent. But now you're able to look where they live, not where your offices are located.
Yeah, 100%. Let's go ahead and transition to the best thing we saw all week. For those of you who are tuning in, you understand what this segment is. Joel, we're going to go ahead and start with you. Joel, what is the best thing that you saw all week?
So this last week, my wife and I, we went and dusted off the trusty travel trailer. We love to hook it up to our F-150 and hit the open road. And so spring is here. We have great summer plans and fall plans as well. Some local trips, but then also some maybe even across the country type trips planned. But so the travel trailer is squeaky clean, looking good, dusted off, and it is ready to roll.
Where can you share that you would suggest them visiting?
So we've taken our travel trailer or RV, whatever you're taking down to Gulf Shores, Alabama, and it was an absolute blast. We've been there 3 times now with our.
Are you on the water?
You're very close to the water, so you're on the intercoastal side, but you're 2 miles or a bike ride to the beach. But I mean, like your campsite is right there on the intercoastal, and it is phenomenal.
JJ, what was the best thing that you saw all week?
Oh man, so everybody's talking about Austin and Miami, right?
Yes,
but one of the best things I saw all week was talking about the number of unicorns in Atlanta. So when you think about OneTrust, MailChimp, there were 3 or 4 more on that list. Calendly, right? Yep. All of them on the list, valuation over $1 billion.
Unreal.
But what it's showing is there's talent here. I moved here 21 years ago because there was talent. I've seen so much change in the city. If you look at all of Metro Atlanta, I think when I moved here, it was right at about 3 million. It's more than 6.5 million in all of Metro. But think about the number of universities nearby. You've got, of course, Georgia Tech. You got Georgia State. You've got University of Georgia right up the road. You got Auburn University not too far from here as well. And so what we're creating are these quiet giants. And I say quiet giants because they're not getting the funding. So if you're in any kind of VC out there, if you're in any kind of PE, you need to start looking at the Empire State of the South.
Without a doubt.
That same article that you were referencing, it mentioned that over the past 5 years, $2.1 billion has been VC funding has happened kind of in the South. $1 billion of that was just this last year alone.
Yes.
And so, almost half of it has been just strictly over the past year. And a lot of it is being led by Atlanta-based companies, which is great to see.
Atlanta, size-wise in population, busiest airport in the world, a lot of education and talented people. I would put Atlanta up there against any other city in the country.
Absolutely.
No longer is Atlanta to be thought of as anything other than a top-tier city. Yeah, it's amazing to see. Amazing to see. Best thing that I saw all week, I'm going to go ahead and keep it personal, but my 7-year-old decided to be a WWE wrestler a couple months ago when I was out on an anniversary trip, and we got a phone call from the nanny that there was a broken arm incident. Of course, not very happy. Long story short, he was in a cast for about 6 weeks, but this kid loves baseball more than he likes to breathe. Okay. If it were breathing or play baseball, he would choose baseball and figure out how to breathe later. So 6 weeks, I don't know if you've been in a cast that long, but you get it off and you can't necessarily move the way that you're used to moving. Anyways, so battling through that a couple weeks, quite literally trying to figure it out, little physical therapy, whatnot. Had a Little League game on Saturday, hit the walk-off over-the-fence home run, nice. 7-year-old, by the way, 7-year-old on a 7-year-old field, 130 feet, but he was able to swing. The prior couple of games after getting the cast off, he actually swung and hit the ball one-handed. All right, moving on. News and notes. Joel?
Sure. A little while ago, you shared an article around Lyft offering basically rides for, it was for low-income, elderly, and then those that just found it more difficult to be able to get to a doctor's office. And then the doctor's office or the medical practice is the one that's covering the cost of that transportation.
Extremely low cost. So if you think about what it would cost to get somebody, say you pick them up in Austell, you take them to Wellstar, the facility there, $35. Mm-hmm. Non-emergency transport, as it stands today, could be $300. Yeah. Okay, and all of a sudden, it makes it a lot easier, less burdensome for not only the patient, but the family. As somebody who takes care of their elderly mother, I'm very pleased and fortunate to do so, but there is a time burden that exists with that. And being able to free up these patients in a low-cost manner to get them to the doctor puts them in a much better spot physically.
We talk about technology enabling and empowering people to do more in life, just in general. This is just an absolute natural, right? The Lyft, the Ubers of the world, being able to help in that situation makes complete sense.
Yeah. All right, shifting gears. So I saw an article that came out that said the average ransomware cost has tripled over the past year or two. So before, in 2019, the average ransomware cost across the United States, Canada, and the EU was about $115,000, which is a chunk of change, don't get me wrong. But in 2020, that average jumped up to $312,000. Where do we go from here? How do we combat this?
Well, number one, crime pays. That's why they're doing it.
Which is ridiculous.
A crime pays. The likelihood of them getting caught is very rare. These are sophisticated organizations. Don't even get me started on nation-state-backed sponsors.
Right.
I'm talking about sophisticated organizations, many of them most likely former military intelligence, former DID, DOD, or just super intelligent people. And what they operate are in these loosely organized cells, right? And these threat actors get together. They target organizations that, number one, can't go down. Energy, hospitals, healthcare, high tech, And so what they've done is created an entire industry. And I mean an industry. If you were looking at all the ransomware and threat actors combined last year, they would have been a blue chip company in terms of stock exchange, how much revenue they made, billions. And so what this does is funds more talent. It funds larger, more aggressive organizations. So it used to be the idea if a threat actor encrypted your data and you didn't pay, well, your data was just lost, right? Couldn't get it. And you may have had encrypted data. Basically what they did was take your data that was in a safe and put it in their safe.
Right.
It's still protected. Now the threat has evolved into exfiltration of data. So not only encrypting it, but taking it off-site. So if you're a healthcare organization or some kind of financial organization, there's penalties for losing that data, right? And so they've gotten a lot more bold. So bold, in fact, if you are in the cyber insurance business, we see a lot of organizations exiting that business to the point that they're like, we're just not paying. If the insurance is not paying and not covering it, those organizations will drop down and be like, I can't give you $50 million.
Yeah.
There's $100,000. Now, I'm not saying that's still not incredibly valuable, but what will happen is the casino is going broke.
Does this eventually turn into a government-backed type of situation? I mean, you think about, FEMA, for example, right? And someone, a storm rolls through, does what they do. FEMA's there to kind of help as that. And I hate to, compare the two, but when you look at it, I mean, there's companies that are in business that do good things, right? They make good money. Then they pay taxes to the government, and it could be any government around the world. I mean, is this a bigger conversation about almost like a blanket insurance policy or a blanket security compliance strategy that's almost provided there?
I think it's some of that. I think what you're going to get is that we need security standards at a federal level, not only from a privacy concern, but if you're an organization operating at this level, then you go through certain audits, and those audits say, hey, I'm running EDR, it's up to date, I've been doing my patching, I've segregated my backups, and again, if you're going after government contracts, that's probably where they'll start first.
Okay.
If you're going to go through a government contract now, there's certain standards you have to adhere to.
Right.
If they pivot that and say, okay, those standards now require a form of security hygiene, a form of best practices that you must verify and prove, I think that's one way to do it. I do think the more insurance organizations just stop paying, then it will change the game. But these aren't dummies.
No.
Right? These are some of the smartest people in the world. And in some cases with these nation states, these are people with the equivalents of, decades of training and PhDs in, not only IT and cybersecurity, but electrical engineering and mechanical engineering. They're smart folks coming to bear. And so in a way, it's a form of war that we don't talk about openly as war, but that's exactly what's happening.
That's exactly what it
There's
is.
a war for our data.
Yeah. Something that I find very interesting is, how servant leadership has become so popular, not only, in different areas of the world, but especially here in the South. I know that's one of your personal principles as a leader. For me, that was one of our founding principles here at Tier 4. I wanted our clients, I wanted our employees, I wanted everyone that ever experienced anything with Tier 4 to feel like we truly cared for them. I know, because I work with a lot of the people that work for you over the years, I know that servant leadership is extremely important to you. For a minute or two, can you speak to that and why that is such a founding principle, or why that's such an important principle for you?
First of all, I take a lot of offense now at people using the term servant leadership. To me, it's just leadership. Because the idea is if you are put in the spot to lead, you're put in the position to take care of others. And so I think a lot of people have watered it down to think that servant leadership is some new meaning. But the idea is if you were given the opportunity to lead, you're given the mantle, you're given the responsibility of other people. There's a saying, if you make it to the top, it's your obligation to send the elevator back down. And the idea is I'm only successful in what I do because of what others do for me. And so it is my position to empower them to do their job. It's my position to provide air cover when they need air cover, to provide support when they need support. Does it ultimately benefit me? Yes. But the idea is if you are granted and fortunate enough to be given a position of leadership, you have to give back. But you actually have to realize, again, it goes back to that humanization of IT. We're managing people. We're not managing packets.
That's right.
We're leading people. We're not leading packets. And so it requires a better understanding of who they are.
And by definition, right, servant leadership flips the typical leadership script by putting people ahead of power. And so the term servant leadership, to your point, sometimes might be watered down in that essence.
Yeah.
But, a servant leadership prioritizes the team's growth and well-being, letting their own needs and ambition kind of take the back seat. And I guess one thing that has become more and more popular, and I think it's refreshing, is that, that leadership of an iron fist, my way or the highway. I don't want to necessarily call it old-fashioned, but you know what I mean by that,
and,
right?
And it doesn't have a place in this world, right?
100%
And
does not.
especially doesn't have a place in technology. First of all, it's an employee's market, right? You look at right now, and the job
Like
market...
a seller's market in the
Yes,
home?
yeah, exactly. I mean, you only have power because somebody gave you the power, right? And so this idea is... employees have that power. And by the way, they need to start standing up. And I'm not talking about unionization or any of that. I'm just talking about if they have challenges, if you've got challenges with your management, you need to be candid enough to say, look, we've got a problem. And you need to be the kind of leader that listens to that. You know what kind of organization didn't listen to that? Enron. And look at what it got them. I'm not there with a bunch of yes men. I'm the same way with my own executives. It's that I'm here to point out risk. I'm here to point out what we can do to make this organization better. Now, it's not about showing up and complaining every time. It's right. How can we make this better? And you have to be, as a leader, candid enough to have those discussions with your team. And as a leader, you've got to be candid enough to have that discussion with your peers.
So rapid fire real quick, because we have 10 key principles of servant leadership. When you think about your position and listening to your people, what are your thoughts on listening being one of those categories?
Of course, listening, empathy. It's got to be there.
Empathy was number 2. So we'll go to number 3, healing. Sometimes helping people, healing, whatever it might be. When you think about healing, what does that mean to you?
Number 1, realizing that they're human. It goes back to that empathy and listening. In some ways, the best way we can help others heal is to allow them a venue where they can talk about what's bothering them.
Absolutely. And part of that also kind of dovetails into the next one, self-awareness, right? And how important it is to have self-awareness, not only for yourself as the manager, the leader, but also your team.
Well, what we're seeing is those that aren't self-aware, they struggle within organizations. They struggle to connect with people. And so this idea of a technologist sitting in the basement playing Dungeons and Dragons and being online each day, those days are over, right? You're leaders that understand the technology, but far more importantly, you understand the needs of others first.
Yeah. And I'll read this because I think it's well put, but persuasion is another key principle. And it says, slick sales tactics may come to mind when you think of persuasion. However, servant leaders use persuasion to build consensus and get buy-in from their team.
And it's sharing in that success, right?
Right.
When you grow and you're doing well, everybody has to share as part of that. The idea is you were successful because someone else empowered you to be successful. One thing we like to do is to try to make sure others have a chance to be heard. As an executive, often your voice is the loudest voice. The problem with that is it often drowns out others. So how do you give others the opportunity to speak, collaborate, have their voice be heard, so it's not just about you all the time? My role as that is to guide us towards an outcome. What are we trying to do? What are we trying to achieve? And let the really smart people talk. I've been very fortunate to have extremely smart people on teams. I have extremely smart people on teams now. They're part of the solution. They're part of helping us select the solution. It's not about all hearing from me. It's about making sure that we stay on track, not only from a timing perspective, but a budget perspective, but letting them do their job.
Yeah. One of our past clients, he's still alive, by the way, but one of the Tier 4 clients of yesteryear, big CIO of a large company, we became friends. We were talking one day, and he talked about an opportunity that he had to leave Atlanta and move to California for a company. He was going to be the 6th employee. Went back home, talked to the wife about the opportunity. Thought it was probably too much risk. However, he later decided in our story that it would have been really cool to have been the 6th employee at eBay. Right? So I got to ask you, do you have any story like that? Would you have been the second employee at Tesla, or were you getting recruited
No,
by...
but I will tell you a really interesting story one time, and this is the power of your network, right? Your network becomes your net worth. You know, if I think about my last 3 jobs, they came because of my network, you know, and so I won't list who the CIO was, but at one point I worked for an organization here in Atlanta where we were one of the largest mid-sized consumer of Dell in the state of Georgia. In fact, we were the first enterprise flash storage project by EMC in the state of Georgia, right? It was a really big project. And about a year after that, the global CIO pinged me and said, I want you to interview for my second in command of Dell. And I was like, oh, okay. And so I flew down. It was a great experience. And I'm interviewing with all her direct reports. And it's the former CIO of Pepsi. And I'm like, what the hell am I doing here? I was like, who called me? I was like, and it was sure because of the power of my network. And I talked to the head of recruiting afterwards, and you know, they'd been bringing people from Fortune 500 and everything, and there was 10 people, and I came in about third, and I didn't get it, and obviously, but I was kind of glad that I didn't get it, because at the time, you know, my father wasn't doing well, and he later passed, and I was taking care of my mother, and I just met my girlfriend, who's now my wife. And so it would have, I love Atlanta, but it was such a great experience because obviously I was doing something right to get noticed that somebody would bring me in for that interview. And then I did so well that I came in third, and I still felt like I won, you know. And so, you know, it's not about the shots you miss. It's about, did you even get a chance to take the shot?
We're going to go ahead and spin the wheel as we do at the end of each one of our podcasts. So if you would, please go ahead and spin the wheel
Big
for
money,
us.
big money, no
Big
whammies.
money.
Big money, big money.
That's right.
No sevens, no sevens, no sevens, no sevens.
Number 4 at Tier 4. All right, let's go ahead and go down the list. Number 4 is, what is your dream travel destination? We're going to go ahead and start with the Mr. Travel Trailer himself. Joel, what is your dream travel destination?
2 things come to mind. I've always wanted to go to Australia, New Zealand area, just that general area. The second would be, with our travel trailer, do an insane cross-country, like 3-month trip and
The
just
loop.
explore the loop. Yep, and just see it all. Go through the southern parts of the United States, up to the northwest. Those are my 2 dream travel location spots.
That sounds great. JJ?
2 things, and one we've actually got planned when my daughters get older is to do a safari and tour of Africa, the continent, and then probably at some point, I think in Fiji. You know, I could see, you know, the clear waters of Fiji, sitting on one of the overwater bungalows, sipping a Mai Tai. Sounds really great.
Very good. Your own private pool, obviously. So my mom lived on the island of Kauai for a number of years while I lived in California. But I will say, even though I've been there a number of times, if you've never been to Kauai, or even if you've been there a number of times like myself, there's not much that beats Kauai. I'll share that. I will also say that it's been a long time since I've been over to Japan. I love the culture of Japan. I love the culinary experience of Japan. I actually really like the people of Japan as well. And that is going to be on my bucket list as soon as this pandemic is kind of been corralled. Joel, we have some really cool VIP events coming back up. Again, these are, you know, COVID-friendly, socially distanced, you know, responsible type of events. If it's something that you're interested in, we'd love to have you. If it's not and you're not ready, obviously no hard feelings, no obligation.
At Dallas Cowboys Club in Dallas, May 28th. If you're a golfer in that region, come join us. And then shortly after that, Gaylord Springs Golf Links in Nashville, June 11th. Come join us there. Tier4Advisors.com/events is where you can register and RSVP.
JJ, I cannot put into words how grateful we are to have you here today, coming through the rainstorm, but just taking your time and coming to do this. You're a true friend, and not only a client, but I really mean that. Thank you so much.
I appreciate you. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. If you or anyone you know needs any help in a data center, telecom, managed services, or security project, and you don't necessarily want to go about that journey on your own, think of Tier 4 Advisors as kind of that Sherpa, if you will. If you were to go climb Mount Everest, you wouldn't do that yourself. You would go out and find a Sherpa who's done that before. We've done thousands of projects in the last 8.5 years of being in business. Reach out to us, find us at tier4advisors.com, and we are here to help any way we possibly can. Until next time, thank you so much. Again, JJ, thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.